What does it mean when General Langley points the finger at President Traoré? When a black man in Washington accuses a black man in Ouagadougou of betrayal, who is really betraying whom? This is not just a clash of nations. It's a war over who gets to define dignity. In this story, Traoré doesn't just defend himself. He becomes the voice of a new Africa, and the world can no longer look away. If Traoré's voice speaks to the Africa you believe in, follow the channel and stay with us. April 3rd, 2025. The Senate Armed Services Committee chamber in Washington, D.C. was bathed in sterile lighting, its polished mahogany desks arranged in a crescent like a courtroom awaiting judgment. Cameras rolled, notepads flipped. In the witness seat sat General Michael Langley, the first black four-star general to command AFRICOM. His shoulders bore stars, but his words would soon weigh heavier than any insignia. "I must inform the committee," Langley began, his voice firm but rehearsed, "that current leadership in Burkina Faso is diverting national gold reserves to finance foreign mercenary forces affiliated with the Russian Federation." A collective silence swept the room. The word gold had that effect. He continued, asserting that Captain Ibrahim Traoré's regime was sacrificing public welfare for militarized control, using wealth meant for the people to pay for Wagner-style soldiers operating in the Sahel. It was the kind of statement that wasn't meant to be questioned. It was meant to be echoed, and it was. That evening, headlines ricocheted across the globe. Burkina's gold funds mercenaries. AFRICOM chief warns. US raises alarm on Traoré's Russian ties. Is Ouagadougou the next Moscow proxy? Across Atlantic cables, in French newsrooms and African radio stations, a narrative began to take shape, of a rogue leader mortgaging his country's future for foreign arms. To some, it sounded familiar. To others, it sounded orchestrated. But in Ouagadougou, the earth didn't shake. Not yet. It waited. That night, as social media surged with the general's face and filtered quotes, a smaller clip began circulating, unedited, raw, from inside the chamber. Langley, when pressed by Senator Cooper of Illinois, had faltered. "Do we have confirmation of these transactions?" Cooper asked. Langley paused. "We have credible indicators." No figures, no documents, no sources cited, just indicators. Still, for Washington, it was enough. For Wall Street, it was destabilizing. For Africa, it was insulting. In the capital of Burkina Faso, news reached the presidency not through a call from an ally, but through a message forwarded by a journalist in Bamako. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room, neither was the timing. Days before Traoré was scheduled to travel to Moscow to attend the Victory Day celebrations alongside President Putin. The communications advisor to the presidency, a former academic named Kabore, stood in the hallway, eyes fixed on the transcript. "They're trying to frame the whole visit," he whispered, "before it even begins." Inside the presidential office, Captain Traoré placed the tablet down, slowly. He didn't speak, not at first. He stood, walked to the window, and looked beyond the courtyard where a flag bearing fluttered in the warm April wind. The sky was clear. The future less so. His aide, a quiet former sergeant named Jibril, finally broke the silence. "You know what they're expecting?" Traoré nodded. "They're expecting silence." Outside, the city buzzed with evening life. Market vendors lit kerosene lamps. Children chased each other barefoot along red dirt alleys. Radios hummed. But something else stirred, subtle, like smoke before flame. Not everyone had heard Langley's words yet, but those who didn't ask if it was true. They asked, why now? Why him? In a neighborhood cafe near the university, a young history professor turned off the news feed and muttered to her colleague, "The worst lies are told in suits, and the deadliest are told by our own." Far away, in a studio in Johannesburg, a late-night host looked into the camera and said, "General Langley might wear a uniform, but today he served a script. The question is, who wrote it?" The next morning, long before dawn, Traoré requested a press appearance. He didn't want diplomats. He didn't want delays. He wanted a camera, a microphone, and the truth. Because this time, he wouldn't wait for Africa to be spoken about. He would speak first. It was not just a testimony. It was a spark. The camera had been rolling for exactly 13 seconds before the man spoke. He did not shift in his chair. He did not glance at his notes. He simply looked at the lens, steady, unblinking, as if daring it to blink first. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, sat in a carved wooden chair with a high back and no cushion. Behind him, the national flag hung slightly askew, touched by the slow churn of the ceiling fan. The air was warm, thick with silence. The press hall inside the presidential compound was not made for show. It was made for truth. A day had passed since General Langley's testimony, but in Burkina Faso, it had aged like poison, quiet but corrosive. The streets had not erupted, but they had held their breath. Everyone was waiting for something more than a press release. They were waiting for reckoning. And then Traoré spoke. "This," he said, his voice low but precise, "is the gold of Burkina. Not his, not theirs." A few feet away, the French interviewer adjusted his glasses but made no move to interrupt. Traoré leaned forward slightly. "Let us not confuse history," he said. Before this administration, this nation had no reserve. None. Not a gram was held in our name. It was taken, smuggled, accounted for elsewhere. We changed that. We began to keep what is ours, in our vaults, under our skies. His words were not loud, but they landed like iron. And now they say we are using that gold to pay mercenaries. He paused, exhaled once. When did defending ourselves become a crime? When did sovereignty require permission? He looked off camera briefly. When he looked back, his tone had shifted. They did not send a journalist. They did not send a diplomat. They sent a soldier, a black soldier, to accuse another black man of betraying his people. The room held its breath. That is not strategy. That is betrayal in uniform. That is using our skin to mask their chains. The journalist finally found words. "Do you think the general believed what he said?" "I think," Traoré replied. "If he was misled, he must have the courage to say so, publicly, not in private corridors, not in a closed-door apology. With the same voice he used to indict us." He straightened. His face was calm, but something behind his eyes burned. "But if he lied," he continued, "if he knowingly stood in that chamber and spoke falsehoods dressed as facts, then he must answer, not to me, not to this government, but to every young African who sees a uniform and dreams of honor, to every child who believed our time had come." He looked at the camera one last time. "The shame is not in being accused," he said. "The shame is in staying silent when truth is strangled." The interview ended without a closing shot. There was no handshake, no exchange of thanks, only a still frame of Traoré staring forward long after the screen had faded to black. That night, the clip rippled across the continent like dry grass catching flame. It was posted, translated, sampled into songs, spliced into TikToks and sermons. The words were no longer just his. They had become the people's. On a roadside wall in Bobo Dioulasso, someone spray-painted it in red. If he was lied to, he must say it. If he lied, he must answer. And across a YouTube screen, as the footage looped for the 1,000th time, a quiet message slid beneath the frame. If you believe Traoré speaks for a new Africa, share this voice. The city didn't sleep the night before. It didn't rest the night before that either. But on the third day, 72 hours since a general spoke oceans away and a president answered from the heart of Africa, the streets finally found their voice. In the early morning haze of Koudougou, a boy with a brush and a can of red paint stood at a cracked wall. He was 16. His hand shook only once. Then, slowly, he wrote the word, slave, all caps, all blood, and beneath it, a stencil of a face that had crossed every screen in Africa that week, the square jaw of General Langley. By noon, the same face had appeared on alley walls in Fardangurma, on market stalls in Bobo Dioulasso, on the back windows of taxis in Ouagadougou, always with the same single word. The message was not elegant, but it was unmistakable. At the center of the capital, where the Parliament dome peaked above the trees, the crowd began to swell, first hundreds, then thousands. By the time the first drone camera rose above the Place de la Révolution, the square was full, shoulder to shoulder, banners overhead, voices tightening in the sun. Some wore shirts with Traoré's face. Others held nothing but cardboard with hand-scrawled truths. Our soil, our rules. A general without a people is just a weapon. Africa does not need permission. In the middle of the square stood a girl, barely 20. Her name was Aissata, a university student by record, a daughter of millet farmers by blood, a child of Burkina Faso by fire. She had not planned to speak, but when the microphone was passed to her and the chant behind her slowed, she stepped forward. Her voice trembled once, then found itself. "My father doesn't know how to read," she said, "but he knows what gold smells like, and he knows what betrayal looks like." A murmur moved through the crowd. "When that man stood in their Senate and said we were thieves of our own treasure," she continued, "he wasn't speaking truth. He was repeating fear. Fear of a continent standing up." She pointed toward the Ministry of Communications, where government antennas rose behind barbed wire. "They control the satellites, but we control the streets." The cheer that followed wasn't loud. It was deep, low, and full, like the sound of drums under earth. Across the city, journalists began broadcasting live from rooftops. Some Western outlets called it a protest. Local reporters called it an awakening. In the comments section of a Nairobi live stream, someone wrote, "This isn't protest, it's memory reclaiming its name." Back in the crowd, Aissata raised her hand. In it was a grainy photo, printed from a school printer, the image of Langley mid-speech. On his forehead someone had drawn the word slave in pen. She held it up, not with hatred, but with clarity. "This," she said, "is what happens when we let others write our story, but no more." The chants returned. One voice, then 10, then hundreds. "Not your gold! Not your truth! Not your chain!" In the northern city of Dori, a young imam played the interview of Traoré through mosque speakers. If he lied, he must answer. In Gawa, the mayor cancelled his scheduled press conference and walked into the street to stand with his people. And in the south, in Banfora, children climbed rooftops to hang kites made of paper with only 3 words: "Dignity is ours." By nightfall, satellite channels could no longer ignore it. CNN Afrique cut to a segment titled, "Burkina's People Answer Back." France 24 aired an emergency panel. A former French colonel remarked, "We may have underestimated this young captain." And a journalist from Ghana replied, "You didn't underestimate him. You underestimated the people." Oh, isho. In the final hours of daylight, as the crowd in the capital began to thin and the sound of chanting melted into songs, a boy with no shoes walked across the square, dragging a flag too large for him. He stopped beneath the Statue of Revolution, tied it to the rail, and whispered, "We are not selling gold. We are buying dignity." The footage from Burkina Faso had now crossed oceans. What began as a ripple of outrage had become a mirror, held up not just to Africa, but to the diaspora. And in that reflection, not everyone liked what they saw. In a studio in Monrovia, Liberia, a woman sat beneath a ring of warm lights. Her name was Eloise Mensah, seasoned journalist, daughter of a dock worker and a seamstress, graduate of Columbia, and host of The Quiet Reckoning, a Pan-African political commentary channel streamed in both English and French. She watched the Langley hearing again, not for the words. She had memorized those. She watched for the blink, for the muscle twitch. For the moment, a man becomes a mask. "He didn't even flinch," she said, eyes still fixed on the screen. Her producer gave a quiet cue. "We're live in 30. She nodded once, took a breath, and when the red light blinked on, so did she. "Good evening, family," she began, voice low, clipped with measured fury. "Tonight, we are not discussing Washington. We are not discussing Moscow. We are discussing mirrors." The opening cut was stark. Side-by-side images of General Langley in his Senate uniform and the same man, decades earlier, in a yearbook photo, black and white, bright-eyed, smiling in a Howard University hoodie. "What happened between here?" Eloise asked, pointing to the boy. "And here." Her finger tapped the general's polished insignia. "When did the son of a black Marine become the face of colonial suspicion?" The next segment was brutal in its clarity. She played the viral clip of Traoré's interview, his voice firm. "That is not strategy. That is betrayal in uniform." She paused the video, frame perfect, at Traoré's eyes. "This was not just about gold," she said. "It was about betrayal, wrapped in black skin and delivered in English." The live chat on the side of the screen flooded with comments. Truth bombs. She said what we've all been thinking. "Langley is not the first, won't be the last." Eloise leaned forward. "Let's be honest," she said. "Hollywood taught us that the villain in Africa is always wearing fatigues. He's dark, he's loud, he's unstable. They gave us that image. We swallowed it." She clicked a remote. Scenes from films flickered. Black mercenaries, violent warlords, generals with unblinking eyes and blood on their hands. "They conditioned us to distrust our own power," she whispered, "to fear our own reflection." Then she played another clip, short, forgotten by mainstream news, a 2016 roundtable at the Pentagon, where Langley spoke of stabilizing operations in mineral-rich zones. She muted the clip and looked directly into the lens. "They've always needed someone who looks like us to speak for them," she said. "Because when the oppressor wears the same skin, the resistance becomes confused." Behind her, the screen shifted to headlines from New York to Paris. "African youths defend controversial leader. Outrage over general's testimony grows. Diaspora divided. Race, loyalty, and the Burkina fallout." She exhaled slowly. "We must stop mistaking melanin for solidarity," she said. "Not every black face stands with black freedom. Some are uniforms, some are masks." As her monologue neared its end, she showed a tweet from a Ghanaian activist. He didn't betray his people. He forgot who they were. The screen went black for a moment. Then Eloise's voice returned, softer. "I do not hate the general," she said. "I pity him, because they gave him a uniform to mask the chains." She looked down, removed her earpiece. In the silence that followed, her producer whispered, "That might be the most honest thing you've ever said." The show ended, but the quote didn't. By midnight, it was trending. By morning, it was stenciled beside Traoré's words on walls in Dakar, Kigali, Atlanta, Kingston, and in the streets of Harlem, someone spray-painted it over a mural of Malcolm X. They gave him a uniform to mask the chains. The sky above Red Square was an immaculate blue, cloudless, endless, a rare kind of May in Moscow that felt more symbolic than seasonal. The sunlight bounced off the golden domes, danced across military medals, and carved every shadow sharp along the walls of the Kremlin. There was no snow, no mist, only clarity. It was Victory Day in Russia, 80 years since Berlin. But this year, something had changed. In the sea of dark coats and medals, there was a new silhouette standing beside Vladimir Putin. A uniform less polished, a skin tone rare in this place, a presence that bent the attention of every camera lens. Burkina Faso's president did not wave. He did not smile. He stood still, hands clasped, as orchestras played war songs in a language not his own. And yet, he understood the rhythm. He had not come for music. When the ceremony ended, Putin stepped aside and let him take the podium, not because it was scripted, but because the world was watching. The president looked out over the crowd, heads of state, soldiers, students, dignitaries, critics. And somewhere, in an unmarked seat, an aide from Washington watching silently. He spoke slowly. The Russian interpreter stood ready. But even before the translation came, the weight of each word settled like dust over the flags. "We were told we could not govern ourselves," he began, "that freedom was too heavy a crown for our heads." He paused. "But we carried it anyway." There were no teleprompters, only the square, the wind, and a man speaking not to nations, but to time. "In Africa, we do not forget, not the borders drawn without us, not the leaders buried without trial, not the resources taken without shame." He did not mention Langley. He did not need to. "In this century," he continued, "we do not ask for permission to exist. We do not apply for dignity. We claim it." Behind him, the Kremlin's towers loomed, cold, watching. "Our partnership with Russia is not one of dependency," he said. "It is one of alignment, on education, on security, on sovereignty." For a moment, silence, then murmurs. A few hands scribbled notes. One journalist lowered his camera. The president scanned the square. His voice dropped. "Not weaker, just closer. Freedom is not given. It is taken." The spring wind swept through the tribunes, rustling papers and ribbons. Somewhere in the crowd, a veteran from Zimbabwe wiped his eyes. Inside the mind of the man speaking, memories stirred. Desert drills under a blistering sun, orders barked at dawn, comrades buried without flags. He had once believed that being an officer meant learning how to obey. Now he knew. It meant learning when not to. The applause came late, tentative, then stronger, then unstoppable. And as he stepped down from the podium, cameras flashed, not for the man, but for the moment. A ripple in the post-colonial script. Backstage, a Russian journalist approached him. "You spoke boldly," she said in accented French. "I spoke honestly," he replied. That night, state television replayed the speech, but it was the raw feed, unfiltered, without cuts, that went viral across African media. No slogans, no raised fists, just truth, spoken with the weight of consequence. In Accra, a professor played the speech in her lecture on post-independence alliances. In Bamako, a group of teenagers painted the words on a school wall. And in Harlem, someone rewrote an old Langston Hughes line to read, "Let America be America again, but let Africa become what it never got to be." For the man who had once stood behind sandbags, this day was not a climax. It was a comma. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a symbol. Africa is not leaving the table. We are building our own. The plane landed quietly, without ceremony. No red carpet, no marching band, just tarmac, heat, and the stillness of a home that knows how to wait. Traoré stepped down the stairwell slowly, his coat folded over one arm. Behind him, aides and ministers. In front of him, nothing but the horizon of Burkina Faso, dry, wide, burning under the May sun. He did not wave, not. He nodded once to the soldiers standing guard, then walked toward the convoy in silence. The speech in Moscow had gone viral. More than viral. It had embedded itself into the marrow of something deeper than news. It became sermon, scripture, slogan. But as Traoré returned, the question still loomed. Would General Langley respond? He hadn't. Not a word. Not a clarification. Not even a diplomatic murmur from Washington. But silence has texture. And this silence felt too calculated to be ignorance, too proud to be remorse. At the palace in Ouagadougou, reporters gathered, hoping for a follow-up, a statement, a headline. Instead, they were handed an invitation. One press seat per outlet. No questions allowed. Only a message. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the low roofs of the capital, Traoré walked alone onto a small wooden stage in the courtyard. No flags, no guards, just a microphone and the sky turning copper. He looked directly into the lens. "My name is not a warning," he began. "It is a mirror." There was no crowd, but across the continent and far beyond, millions were watching. I was born in a land where maps were drawn by strangers and rewritten in blood, he said. I grew up in a system where my skin meant suspicion and my silence meant survival. He paused. But I am silent no more. The camera held his face in full frame, no lower thirds, no captions, no distractions. I did not go to Moscow to seek permission. I did not speak to impress Russia or provoke the United States. I spoke because someone had to. Because when a black man stands tall, another black man is always paid to drag him down. He let the weight of the sentence linger. Langley may never respond. That is his right. But it is also his burden. His hands remained at his sides, his posture still. This moment is no longer about a general in a foreign uniform. It is about the systems that build those uniforms, that polish black skin until it forgets what it once protected. His voice shifted, not louder, just deeper. I do not hate the man who stood before the Senate and recited what he was told. I grieve for him, because he was taught that proximity to power is the same as possessing it. He was taught that to belong, he must betray, that to serve his nation, he must erase his people. Traoré stepped forward just once. To the young black soldier watching this from a base in Mali, I say, you do not need to become the enemy to earn respect. To the diplomat sitting in London who swallows every insult to keep her post, you do not need to kneel to stay standing. To every black man and woman taught that the only way forward is to follow, look again. The road has already begun behind you. He looked to the side, where a mirror had been placed, not for effect, but for truth. This skin, he said, touching his cheek, is not a shield to be sold. It is history, a legacy, a promise. And then his voice dropped one final time, quiet, cutting. If you see a black man in power and choose to attack him for your master's applause, then look in the mirror and tell me who's still a slave. If you believe Traoré is rewriting history for a new Africa, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your voice, not to celebrate power, but to witness dignity. See you in the next story, and tell us, what does freedom mean to you when no one is watching?